So we've got this changing landscape, and it's changing across three dimensions. One from a trade perspective, two from a manufacturing perspective, and thirdly from a supply chain perspective. And we'll look at each of these in turn. So from a global trade perspective, we all know that global trade growth has been slowing in recent years, particularly post-financial crisis. What has become apparent in the last 5 years is that the ratio of trade growth to GDP growth has reduced from a traditional ratio of 2-to-1 to about 1-to-1. And in 2016, it actually dropped below 1-to-1. I'll just show you here. So the blue line, we've got trade volume growth. The red line, we've got GDP growth. So trade used to grow at an average of 2+ relative to GDP growth. In recent years, it's reversed. It's now 1-to-1, and last year it was 0.6. So trade growth is slowing, and the ratio of trade growth to GDP growth is slowing, and GDP growth is slowing. Since the WTO was established in 1995, there's been an acceleration of the number of what are called free trade agreements is the general term. Most of these are actually preferential trade agreements, but FTAs is the general term that's used for them. And we can see here the growth in recent years, the last 20 years, particularly after 2008, when the World Trade Organization aspiration of a global free trade agreement, what was known as the Doha round, could not be concluded. And since then, there's been a whole raft of predominantly bilateral trade agreements put in place. One country trading with another country under preferential, mutually beneficial circumstances. Right now, there are about 400 arrangements in place around the world, and there are, since the WTO, there's 400 new ones been notified. There's currently, for goods, 279 in place, and there's about 100 more being negotiated. As I said, these are predominantly bilateral, which is against the whole principle of the WTO, which is plurilateral. Now, in the meantime, what's happened is that in very recent years, we've seen protectionism and populism. And this is counter to free trade. I think the quote at the bottom for the Director General of the WTO just about sums it up. The net positive effect of trade, which businesses around the world generally subscribe to, means nothing if you've lost your job. So the direct local impact breeding the populism, we've seen this manifest itself in the Brexit vote and in the Trump vote and in some other European elections where parties that are domestic, protectionist oriented have seen great gains. This chart on the right shows us, from the WTO, it shows us discriminatory trade policy measures plotted against liberalizing trade measures. So if we implement a discriminatory trade measure, so tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers, dumping duties, all these sort of things, that's discriminatory. And you can see how it's increasing. Protectionism is increasing. Year-to-date discriminatory across all countries. So this plot here was the, sorry, I've lost my point to that. This plot here was the G20 countries. All countries discriminatory 401 and liberalising 166. So we're seeing protectionism accelerate at a time when global trade growth is slowing.